But it is my honor this morning to kick off this event to tell you the person that we've had chosen, not working on difficult problems, but taking a page from Campbell's book by saying managing conditions, managing Jim, managing problems, not working on difficult problems. But Jim Mayer is Executive Director of California Forward. You've probably heard about them. They're a bipartisan public interest effort that's trying to bolster our democracy and improve the governance, the performance of governments in California. Now, it sounds like a big thing to do, and it is. Since its founding in 2008, Jim and California Forward have really played a collaborative role in reforming the state's redistricting system. They were part of that whole thing, and with the primary elections. And they've also framed a lot of the legislative debate about budget and fiscal reforms, like the 2/3 budget vote, etc. Now California Forward is launching a very ambitious effort. They're reaching out to local and regional leaders statewide, working with them to develop the details of policies that would restructure the relationship between state and local governments. So, before California Forward, Jim was executive director of the Little Hoover Commission, and you all know that organization, and probably many of you remember that the Little Hoover Commission in 2005 wrote a report with recommendations for reforming the governance of CalFed. Well, Jim has kept up his interest in water and been involved in looking at Delta Vision and now the Delta Stewardship Council process. For more than a dozen years, Jim was a daily newspaper journalist. He was a senior writer with the Sacramento Bee, where he won an award from the Water Education Foundation for his covering of water issues. And he was a staff writer for the Bakersfield, California, and the Press Tribune in Placer County. Now, during his career as a journalist, again, he was recognized statewide for his coverage of these issues, including education. He even did a little work as a journalist in between jobs for the Water Education Foundation. So we've been very proud to watch Jim's career unfold and glad that he continues his interest in water. He serves on the board of the Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, and he's Associate Director of the Yolo County Resource Conservation District. Jim, it's really a pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Well, good morning, everybody. It is really glad to be here. I want to begin, of course, by lowering expectations. When Rita called me a couple of months ago and said, would you come talk to this group about the Delta, that's thinking about the Delta, about California Forward, I said, of course, I'd be happy to do that. And then when I saw the agenda come out, that the topic was that we're going to think new and better ways to solve the Delta's problems, I thought, boy, what did I get myself into, right? Because in my 8 years at the Sacramento Bee, covering exclusively water issues, I saw a lot of very smart people, very dedicated people working on these issues in the late 80s and the early 90s through some very difficult times, through both flood and drought, trying to figure out the systemic long-term problems. In my 11 years at the Little Hoover Commission, I assertively tried to make sure that the commission never came near the topic of water. Every time it would come up, I'd say, don't go there, it's full of demons, you don't want to go near the water. And of course, I was able to manage that until my final year at the commission, when the governor personally penned a letter to them and asked the commission to look at the governance of CalFed. And in fact, when I first got the call from the Horseshoe, they said, we want you to look at this. I said, we'd only do this if the governor signs a letter. And within 20 minutes, it was the fastest the administration had ever acted on anything. They had this letter in front of us and said, please look at this. And they did produce a report after a fair amount of work called Still Important and Still Imperiled. And I have to tell you that, again, in my own personal review and time, talking to folks that had worked on the Record of Decision in CalFed and tried to create an organizational structure with the Bay Delta Authority, that there was a lot of really smart people that had done some really smart things to try to solve that problem, to try to move this ball along. And then, of course, undaunted by my effectiveness at trying to fix the performance of government through the Little Hoover Commission, we then launched this small project called California Forward to change how we govern ourselves throughout the state. And we have been working on a set of political reforms that are intended to improve the ability of elected leaders to solve problems and to be held accountable to voters, of which the top two primary and citizens redistricting we think will contribute. Some term limit reforms we've been working on we think will contribute. Some legislative reforms that we're teeing up we think will contribute to that. We've also been working on a set of fiscal issues. That's how do you really make smart fiscal decisions? There's never enough money to go around. How do we discipline this appropriately, not to make government too big or too small, but to make sure that it is being as effective and responsive as it can be. And we've made some progress, and we've had some, honestly, some setbacks, right? This isn't a clean, easy path. As we often remind ourselves at the end of a long day, if this has been easy, someone would have done it before. And so we are working on all of those issues, including this issue now about what's the scale of government in California? How do we structure ourselves in a state this large, this diverse, to actually accomplish the goals we want to? So having said that, and hopefully appropriately lowered expectations that I don't come with the Holy Grail about how we untangle the delta and put it back together, I do have three goals for my time with you this morning. The first is I want to share with you some of what I've been hearing from the smartest people about why it is so challenging for us to govern ourselves. And I think that some of this problem assessment may inform your own discussions and deliberations about water in general and the delta in particular. Secondly, I'd like to share with you what I'm hearing from really smart people about what we could and should do differently in order to solve some of these problems, manage the problems, as Campbell said. And third, and perhaps most substantive, or at least most discreet, I'd like to find an alternative quote to the time-worn Mark Twain quote about whiskey and water that it turns out he probably didn't say anyway, right? So within the last couple of months, I've seen that quote used 3 times, and I thought if nothing else came out of this conference today, if we had a new quote to rely upon as we pen op-eds, that would be a noteworthy accomplishment. So 3 goals. So first, this first goal, what's wrong and why? And I'm going to give you 3 specific, obviously very high-level problems. The first is we are confronted with very big problems, and so we try to solve very small ones. And this is, of course, perfectly rational, right? You know, when I was a Boy Scout leader, I used to tell the kids who weren't in very good shape, who had blisters on their foot, that we were going to get to the top of the mountain one step at a time. And those kids that were willing to put one unlaced boot in front of the other got to the top of the mountain. So this is rational. The problem with it is we have ended up, and I'm not specifically talking about water here, I'm drawing from my work across government, we end up with literally dozens of programs funded in lots of little silos of money that actively discourage people from working together. Right? And I want to give you a few examples of what I mean. And again, I think it's really helpful to look across the public sector, across the public ambition, and draw from what's right and wrong. If you look at the work we've done with at-risk families, and this was something that I was exposed to a fair bit at Little Hoover Commission, completely different from my experience as a journalist working on natural resource issues. But I can assure you, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, we spend billions of dollars a year with at-risk families. Through the education system, through CalWorks, through workforce development, through drug and alcohol, through mental health, through a variety of programs, we spend literally billions of state, federal, and local dollars. And in some cases, we've been pretty effective, but nobody's satisfied with the progress. And one of the most frustrating parts about that system is that we can identify through really good risk and needs assessment when families are in trouble with some precise data, and we wait until they get so bad before we publicly intervene that the intervention is very expensive and not very effective. And we do that, of course, because we're trying to ration money, right? And so we're going to say we're going to intervene in those families that are just about ready to fall off the cliff. And as a result, we pass up the opportunities to be much more effective and much more efficient with our resources by being proactive and intervene. There is so much literature and research on this that it bends your brain to think we haven't figured out how to solve that problem. We do the exact same thing with the mental health system, you should know. And of course, mental illness is not something that's related to income, right? When you start talking to people in middle class and upper class income, many people have people with mental illness in their family. There's a stigma, of course, about it, so we don't talk very much about it. But the reality is that through the public health system and even through the private health system, we ration our care to the people with the most serious mental illness. Right? We actually will tell people to go away and come back when their mental illness is worse, and we become less effective at governing it. We've done the same thing in criminal justice policy. You know, the short answer is on this, we have, and I've done lots and lots of work on this issue, we have one of the most expensive and one of the least effective prison systems in the nation. And we know how to fix it, right? We've got lots of criminal justice research about when and how to intervene, how to replicate evidence-based practices, how to use dollars wisely. And this isn't a tough on crime, soft on crime. Some of the most proactive work is being done in Texas, which executed more people last year than the other 49 states combined, right? This is about being smart and effective. So what does this have to do with water? You know, the overall conclusion is that part of our problem is we've taken very discrete, small problems, tried to solve it without thinking about the big picture. What are we actually trying to accomplish, and when do we need to get there? I'll talk to a little bit more about that. But again, I'm trying to triangulate this for you and hopefully expose you to some issues that give you a fresh perspective on the issues you're trying to solve in terms of water and landscape and so forth. The second set of problems, if the first set of problems here, which was confronted with big problems, we try to solve small ones. The answer there is a strategic one. How do you strategically use your time and resources to make incremental steps towards a big conclusion? The second set of problems that I've heard people articulate, and please don't think any of this comes out of my brain. The very best thing I do is remember to close my mouth and use the two ears and not the one mouth. And this is like, I'm trying to distill what I've heard from very smart people over the last few years. The second is really a cultural issue that we have in government. And this is about, in politics and in policy, we focus primarily on what's wrong and who's to blame, rather than what's the solution and who needs to be part of it. And it truly is a cultural thing that transcends much of what we do. In my first profession as a former journalist, I fought daily in the newsrooms that we ought to be spending as much time writing about successes as we were failures. And the editors would say, you go do that, Jim, and then they'd put the failures on the front page and the successes on B10, right? But it also works that way in the legislature. They don't do oversight hearings when a program is working to figure out how to replicate it. They do oversight programs when somebody screws up and gets their name in the paper, right? And of course, we all know about the hyper-partisanship that we all know isn't just affecting California, but it's affecting the nation. In some recent conversations I was having nationally, people now want to blame California for the hyper-partisanship in Washington, D.C. The other 49 states are saying it started out west. You guys are the big gorilla in the room. Your hyper-partisanship is the problem. So I want to unpack that just a little bit, that this truly is a cultural thing. And we may not be able to change this, but understanding what this problem is, I think, is really important. As a result of this, people avoid being part of the solution, right? An active strategy in many circles is to try to make sure that no one can associate you with the problem, right? We have all kinds of water districts, just to name some in the state, that want to say, we don't have anything to do with the problems in the Delta, right? We're too far upstream, or something like that, right? The culture here is to make sure that no one associates you with the problem, because then you may have to be part of the solution. Lawmakers also have a tendency to focus on this, right? They will also try to be focusing on who's to blame for a problem rather than what they can do as policymakers to solve a problem. Bureaucracies become hyper sensitive to risk, right? Anybody who's worked in a bureaucracy knows this, that even when there's strong consensus among the management or science and technical team about what could be done and should be done, the conversation quickly goes to how much trouble people are going to get in if they interpret their statutory authority in a way that may not be agreed to by the chairman of a committee. And this becomes a huge problem. I already mentioned that the media is a big part of this problem. And I also then think that one of the things that happens here is that we create fictions about what the real problem is and what the real solution is in order to match our own realities. So there's some cultural issues there. I'm sure you all thought of some other examples or ideas about how this problem of a problem-oriented society rather than a solution-oriented culture is stymieing some of our problems. You could go back to the at-risk children, you could go back to the mental health or the prison examples I used, and it's thread throughout those issues as well. The third set of problems, if you will, are organizationally. And everyone knows that that California is really big, but it isn't just the size that matters in California, it's the scale that matters in California. And what we're doing at California Forward, which is really just carrying forward the work that's been done by dozens of blue ribbon commissions and the California Constitution Revision Commission and others, is really looking at where's the scale of our problems and how do we structure our governance and organization to be able to solve that problem. And we know that most problems are either community or regional or international, but our political structures are county, state, and national. And how do you do this? And we also know, again, not just because we carve off small problems, but because we've organized our government, there's layers and layers of governments that don't necessarily work together, even though they need to work together in order to solve a problem. So this issue of scale and scalability is really a critical one in California. It's interesting because when I talk to folks in other states that are working on governance issues, they think about the same thing. But then when you talk to them, you say, what are you thinking about? They say, well, you know, there's multi-state economic regions. You know, there's the whole Midwest Corn Belt that's worrying about how to intersect with the international commodity markets and those kinds of things. In California, we have 9 regional economies. Right? This isn't multi-state regions. This is within California. We have serious, distinct regions that you all know about. So those are the problems that I wanted to share with you. Now, what are the ways we can think about this differently? My second goal here is there any way we can think about this differently? And again, I want to track in terms of strategy, culture, and organization. The first part of this strategy, that as a course of our work over the last year, we started with innovative government leaders at the local level. And we said, where are you finding breakthroughs? How do you organize yourselves and strategize yourselves to get jobs done? And the first thing that came out of their mouth, almost like they had been practicing for a Sunday morning chorus, was we focus on outcomes, right? If we want to get anything done in our community, we identify an outcome that everybody has to rally around, youth, right? If our goal is to have more kids graduate from high school, stay out of the probation department, stay out of foster care, matriculate to a community college, we have to focus on outcomes, that outcome. And when we focus on that one outcome, everybody has to come to the table around that outcome. Right? The schools can't solve it by themselves. The police department can't solve it by themselves. The welfare system can't solve it by themselves. You need an outcome that brings people together. And that's a really important element that as you test it, it holds up really well. It sounds very soft, intangible, what do we do about it? But put it into action and you'll see the conversations start to change. An essential prerequisite, by the way, I will assert, to truly getting a breakthrough change from an outcome focused means that people have to actually invest and buy in to the outcome, right? We can't say, we want to fix the delta in a way that's good for both the environment and water users, and if that doesn't work out, we're going to sue, right? That doesn't work, right? And so you can make progress with the first while your lawyers are in the back drawing up what they're going to file with the judge in Fresno. But if you see where the breakthroughs have come, it's where people are personally committed to working together towards common outcome and goal. And they don't have a plan B that they're hoping they can use sooner than later, right? So the second part of this is that you really need to discipline. Where people have said they've been effective is, once you have this outcome in place, then you have to decide what's the critical path to get there. This is where you can take small steps towards a large outcome, but they have to be the right steps, and you have to be incredibly disciplined to do those right steps. This is, of course, challenging when you're not sure. You may know what step 1 and 2 is, but you don't know what step 3, 4, and 5 is. And so we've been deploying folks like McKinsey to say, how do you actually work this out? And we've got some ideas that we're trying to embed in culture of decision making. But really, it is about being very careful. And one of my observations, if you will, around water policy is sometimes we do everything that everybody wants to do, not what everybody agrees on is critical to get done in order to reach the big goal. And that's hard in a public interest political environment to say no. But there's not enough money and there's not enough time, and not everything contributes to the goal with equal weight and value. And so I think that that's a critical element. And again, when we've talked with government leaders about things that have really been breakthroughs, they had full buy-in on outcomes. Plan B was another shared outcome, not everybody goes their own way. It was where there was a discipline to pursue what they were trying to do. And it really transformed from a strategy around being outcome and performance-based to a culture about being outcome and performance-based, about trusting in the system, knowing that data is never going to be able to show everything you want it to, but getting better with your data and using a commitment on that data to just be honest about what you're doing. One of the units of government I've been tracking, because it's highlighted as one of the best in the country, is a version of a First Five Commission in West Palm Beach that is working with a very difficult population in South Florida to get them ready for school. They have made tremendous progress, and the first thing they want to tell you about is their failures. the first thing they say is, we tried this, it didn't work, we tried this, we didn't work, we tried this, we didn't work. And I say, why are you still here? And they say, because we learned from every one of those failures and we were disciplined ourselves to continuing to move towards the outcome with the next best step. So the strategy can actually turn into this culture of being focused on it. Now, what about this organization thing? You know, the organizational part is really hard, very, very difficult. And I want to describe it mostly as characteristics of where people have pointed to this and said, this is what government organization, or public sector even better, because it doesn't always limit it to government agencies. It can be nonprofit, it can be for-profit. It is about the community space, the community sphere. It is cooperative, collaborative, and integrated. Right? So if you take this strategy about focusing on outcomes, a culture about being disciplined and data-driven and performance-driven, and then you create organizational dynamics that are cooperative where they need to be, collaborative where they need to be, and they integrate where they need to be, that's where people have started to see breakthroughs. You know, again, I'm going to talk a little bit about Mark Twain's quote, but one of the quotes that have always struck me as very powerful, and when I try to figure out where's the moral compass that should be driving many of us, there's a quote by Teddy Roosevelt that comes up. Of all people, Teddy Roosevelt, right? And of course, if you've ever read much about Teddy, you know, you get conflicted, right? Because he's this conservationist who went and killed all these big animals in Africa, right? And he was a conservationist who was in favor of the Reclamation Act and other things. But you know, he had a compass, and it was very true, and it was very consistent throughout his life. And one quote that I always fall back on was, Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican growing up in an era where there was still a lot of concentration of money in this country, said, America will never be a great place for anyone to live until it is a good place for everyone to live, right? That there is an economic element of democracy as well as a political element. And as I was thinking about our time together here today, I thought, how did that apply to the Delta and to both the strategy and the culture and the organization that I've been trying to talk about? I'll submit that until the Delta is truly on a trajectory toward healing and sustainability and can be managed, everybody has a stake in that. Everybody is at risk, right? People can't they can all carve their water systems out. They can do desalinization or come up with legal arguments why their diversions upstream don't impact the Delta. But the reality is, until there is a solid trajectory toward improvement in the Delta, nobody should feel comfortable, right? Everybody should be bought into that. So finally, my third goal, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts, and maybe we can start the conversation before we go to the panel. The third goal was this new quote by Mark Twain. And I'm embarrassed to confess that I probably spent more time on this than the first two parts of the speech. You know, there's this Twain autobiography that's 680 pages before notes and index. And I didn't read it cover to cover, but I mined it, you know, kind of like a gold miner looking for the word water, or looking for the word whiskey, or looking for the word solution, or any word that might give me something to grab onto. And I have to tell you, I couldn't. So I went to Google, and I Googled everything and read every Twain quote I could possibly find. And interestingly, I found a very good quote about whiskey. Maybe not surprising, but Twain actually had a lot to say about whiskey. Really insightful work. I also found an interesting quote about water that strikes me that maybe he'd been drinking too much whiskey when he penned the quote about water. I found one about world peace. I found one about the opening of the Broadway Bridge on the Sacramento River in 1867, which I thought was kind of interesting because he was criticizing the critics. He said everybody wants to be a bridge builder on the day the bridge gets built, right? He also had some very good quotes about profanity. But at the end of the day, and here's where I have to look at my notes, I apologize. At the end of the day, I pinned my own quote. And now I can see if I can find it, otherwise this is going to be a real bust. That's what you get for working at midnight. Okay, here it is. Now, if this is really good, my suggestion is we find somebody to say it who's really important. So then it can get picked up and you guys can all use it in op-eds for the next 15 or 20 years. And And I didn't conspire with Campbell before I wrote this. When Californians learn to manage water, for fish, for farmers, for families, for the future, we will be able to manage everything. And until we do, we won't be able to manage anything. I truly believe that much of what we've done in water, through the Delta Stewardship Council, through the vision, through the struggle to be adapted, to develop adaptive management, to use science, you should know that as frustrating as you all may be on the progress, you are on the cutting edge. Right? You truly are on the cutting edge. And if there's anything that there's some things that we probably need to think differently about, and this is a great topic for today, but don't think that there isn't plenty that you're doing that is working and is vitally important. This is an incredibly difficult thing to do. When the Little Hoover Commission took on the request from the governor to look at the structure of CalFed, we looked at every other effort, multi-state effort to do ecosystem restoration, and there was no silver bullets out there. There was no panacea, right? Everybody's grappling with these same problems. What you need to do is be persistent. And this isn't just about lowering expectations for whether or not I had the right answer to come in here and tell you how to think differently. I think we have to be realistic about what our expectations are. Our children will grapple with the Delta. Our children's children will grapple with the Delta. The question is whether or not we continue to make progress in our strategy, in our culture, and in our organization to put it on a course of getting better over time. We need to be as focused on outcomes. We need to think big. There can be no small thoughts. But at the end of the day, don't set ourselves up for failure, right? And this finally goes back to this culture around the public, around this problem of kind of shame and blame and a focus on problems versus solutions. And this is my final thought. We've done an extraordinary amount of work at California Forward trying to understand how Californians think about California. And I'll tell you that no matter what The Economist says, no matter what the New York Times wants to write, Californians love this state. Whether they're from a red county or a blue county, they love this state. They want it to work. They think it can work. They think the legislature can work. And the line that lines up is where it's clear what government is trying to do, and there is honesty about the progress being made toward that, and a commitment to continue to use public dollars in the best available way to get to there. They don't expect government to be perfect. They expect it to be honest and straightforward, and they expect it to be persistent and diligent. And I find that, as somebody who is from my time in public sector and view the public sector as an honorable place to spend an entire profession, I think that's a perfectly reasonable standard for all of us to hold ourselves to. So I hope this has contributed to what is a much more productive day about how to think about the Delta. And Rita, if there's time for questions, I'd be happy to take one, or you can move on to more thoughtful people.
Yes, no, thank you, thank you. There is time for questions, and we welcome them. And we've got somebody running around with a floating mic. And you can just identify yourself and don't be shy. All right, Byron will get it going while I go to the court.
I was going to cheat and save this to later on my panel, but since no one's asking, Jim, how much of the problem do you think is people don't agree on the problem definition or share that problem definition? The co-equal goals, for example, water supply reliability and ecosystem restoration. Neither really defined very well in the statute, perhaps ecosystem restoration more than water supply reliability. Can we make progress if we don't agree on what the goal is?
I think it's really hard. I honestly think it's very, very hard if you don't have that commonality about what you're trying to accomplish and some sense of what you know or don't know about the problem. And I'm not day to day in this world like all of you are, so I can't tell you what the fraction of which is. I'll tell you a couple of things. One was the Little Hoover Commission is a motley bunch of people, and they're bipartisan, and they come from every walk of the country, and every one of them got there because they're really important. And when that process worked really well was when they would kind of open their minds to being fact-based, not interest-based, and develop a common understanding of the problem. Through a set of work on this, we had a very conservative group of Little Hoover Commissions advocating for drug treatment in prisons. Why? Because it was the data-based, evidence-based, most effective way to reduce crime, period, end of story, the ideology aside. So if the folks in the room think that one of the challenges is that people don't honestly agree on what the problems are, I would say that's an impediment. I thought we were kind of past that. I thought that there was more agreement on the problem, and people weren't necessarily fully committed to the outcome. This is just my perception. I may be completely wrong. I'm more worried about saying, by the folks that say, yeah, we're all for the twin goals, but then at the end of the day, 90% of their organizational energy is, how do we go alone?
So I have to tell you that Jim was also briefly my son's scoutmaster. So Jim, and I must say I have a particular interest in this question, but as the Conservancy focuses on developing a strategic plan for the Conservancy, what would you suggest be the points of focus for a strategic plan? And what's the role of a strategic plan?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think one of the most important roles of a strategic plan is to solve this issue, right? What is the problem that you're going to solve? I think the challenge for the Conservancy, again, without the kind of due diligence that I would normally put into wanting to come up with my best answer, is that the problem with the Delta isn't that there's not enough government agencies. The problem is we don't have a system of governing the issues. And I think we've made some progress in that, at least in organizational design with the Stewardship Council and others, and now implementation is critically important, right? For those of us who've written laws, everyone wants to write how it's going to be implemented in the law, and I'm one of those that says you can't, right? The Stewardship Council is going to be led by the council. So my suggestion is that you can contribute to that strategic plan. Not only has to outline this problem, but think about how the Conservancy works with those other government agencies, and not just with the government agencies, but in terms of state agencies, but the local government agencies and others. If you can come up, so that's the second kind of immediate response I'd have. And the third is to be extraordinarily outcome-based, right? What outcome is it that you're trying to deliver? And then who and what do you need in order to get that done? And one of the challenges with any organization, California Forward in particular, I think, but for a variety of reasons, is there's lots of good ideas. And the board itself has to say, we're not going to do everything. We're going to do what are the next right steps that we think will get us to those outcomes. So I think that the strategic plan, any strategic plan, needs to create that kind of organizational unity about what you're trying to accomplish, the steps towards getting in that direction, how you're going to measure yourself, and then use it, and then be active, and not leave it on the shelf.